You see these? These are parasites. One is sucking on my head. One is sucking on my chin. You know, fairly benevolent it seems, but they're parasites, so they're depleting me of energy, making me a little bit more groggy, despite the fact that it's 3 o'clock in the morning where I'm at. I'm a little groggy anyways. And they're essentially sapping my cerebral cortex of energy. Yeah, I could probably be a lot more energetic if I didn't have these parasites sucking off my energy. Probably be a little bit more myself, a little more animated, a little happier to be alive, a little bit more hopeful and optimistic, but I got these parasites on my mind. Gotten used to it. They've been here all my life. Sometimes they're over here and here, just sucking away. Yeah, I went to a parasite clinic. Had them removed. They got these clamps. Jaws of life. Pulled them off my face. Then they just reattached to my heart. Pulled them off again. Oh, got down to my abdomen. Started sucking out the life from my abdomen. Oh, went down to my cock. Got my balls. Oh, God, it hurts. Parasites on my balls. Oh, on my thighs. Then the clinicians had to pull the parasites off my thighs. Oh. And then they went back to my head. It was fuck. These parasites are unruly. Shed some light on the situation. So yeah. Parasites. Ugh. And the difficulty about parasites is that oftentimes you have to get another parasitic program to deconstruct the primary program that's parasitically probing you, sucking out your life force and energy. So it's parasites upon parasites upon parasites upon parasites. If you're not careful, and you gotta be scrupulous, you gotta have a fine eye for these things. The concept of parasitism will itself become parasitic upon your mind. You gotta watch out. You do. Because what you want to do is you want to sit back in your lazy boy and be lazy. You'll want to talk about how everything is parasitic, and everything in this manifest realm is eating everything else. Like there's this one metaphysician, Bernhard Guenther, who I have respect for, and I watched one of his videos today. He's talking about hyperdimensional beings, negative high density beings that essentially eat consciousness. But they can only eat, but what they really like, they're connoisseurs of consciousness, and what they like to do is feed off of negative emotions that are chosen through free will. Man, theology gets complicated after a while. And I'm like, ooh, that's really juicy. And then I had this thought that maybe this is a projection of the metaphysician. That the metaphysician, him or herself, likes to eat thoughts, likes to eat philosophy, likes to eat theology, likes to eat everything through the mind, and gets obsessed with this parasitic notion, and it's really just a projection of the metaphysician's shadow. There are these hyperdimensional entities eating the energetic emanation of the metaphysician and of the human beings. But this is really just a projection, because it's really the metaphysician that just likes to eat all of being with his or her mind. So, if we can just be honest and say that we like to eat reality with our minds. I'm kind of speaking metaphorically here, but I'm kind of not speaking metaphorically. Like, I have all these books around me. I could consume a book like I would eat an apple. It would feed my mind like the apple would feed my body. So if I'm a metaphysician philosophizing about hyperdimensional realities, feeding off my aura because they augment themselves through assimilating my energy field, maybe I'm just talking about me as a metaphysician. Maybe that's what I'm doing with all my books and all my thoughts about reality. Thoughts eating thoughts. I'm gonna pull these fuckers off. What is parasitism? Parasitism is very important to understand. You can understand it from a lot of different angles. You can understand parasitism from a political angle. You can understand parasitism from a physical angle. You can understand parasitism from a spiritual angle. You can understand parasitism from a romantic, sexual angle. There's all these different, from a parental angle, from a sibling angle, from a frenemy, angle. We know those frenemies out there. The frenemy has got me and taken me down with the friendship virus that doesn't have my best interests in mind. And they're just sucking off me. Beware of the frenemy. Parasitism. 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 What is it? Can we go so far as to say that parasitism starts within? Almost. Because it's not quite right. It's not quite accurate. Parasitism can start from without. When you're 3 years old and you got a toxic parent who destabilizes your mind stream and sucks your attention into his or her mind stream. Just takes. Because when we destabilize another organism through manipulating their mind, criticizing them, judging them, whatever, boom, that attention goes upon us. Now think about that. That's really fascinating. In the wild, when you're a gazelle out on the field and you sense a leopard or a cheetah or a lion or a tiger or a panther or whatever it is that super cat happens to be, you could feel it looking at you. Boom, and you're like, I gotta run. Boom, I'm out. So there's the sense of being stared at. When we are giving our attention to another human being, we are giving them our attention. We're giving them this focus of energy like a laser beam onto them. And they feel it. It's like when it's loving attention and we get the loving attention of another being, we're getting energized by it. We feel augmented by their loving attention. It's a positive experience. Right? But if we happen to be like a parasitic individual, we can destabilize another person and we get their attention because they've been destabilized and they're feeling insecure and uncertain and in danger and threatened. And we can feel augmented by that in that perverted way, in that sadistic way, right? So there's a parasitism there. Parasitism. It's going to happen very early on in life. And as you grow older, you can experience it from multiple angles, but what I'm really fascinated with is the parasitism within. That is an incorporation of all these different angles, but then becomes as if an autonomous programming, or an autonomous kind of self-organizing, autopoetic, self-sustaining thrust or energy or impulse, which basically appropriates anything and everything, but toward what end? What am I talking about? Well, what I'm getting at in this kind of improvisational monologue is that there's such a clarity of consciousness that one can realize, and then one can see the various activities and thoughts and behaviors that interfere with that intrinsic luminosity. And that's what I'm looking at as, and loosely designating as a parasitic interiority, a parasitic program within that diminishes our well-being. And this program is very assimilative. And I'm speaking somewhat analogously when I say program. It's a kind of like a viral phenomena inside of us. And it assimilates and it appropriates anything to kind of get us feeling down compared to what we could feel. But then we're like, well, what's my vested interest in feeling down? I ain't got no vested interest in feeling down. You know what I mean? Why would I want this on my heart? In my soul? I wouldn't. But then I do feel down. I feel depressed. I feel heavy. I feel weighty, as if something is siphoning off my energy, but I can't figure out where. I just feel groggy and crappy, and there's always something more to being and feeling and knowing, but I can't quite get there. It's like Neo before he wakes up in the Matrix. He's like, something's wrong. Something's off. So what I would like to offer is that one version of enlightenment, although I don't really use that word because it's so compounded with difficulty and such an unmanageable diversity of perspectives, but I'm going to use it anyways. One version of enlightenment is to realize that there is this kind of viral compound in you, this viral aggregate that's taking in all these different perspectives from everywhere, whether it could be politics, whether it could be philosophy, it could be sexual, romantic relationships, it could be family, it could be from the media, from education, it could be from, where else, entertainment. Any of these things that have been, these perspectives that come into the self-system, the mind and heart stream, and then they're there and they just kind of leech off of our intrinsic well-being. Leech off of it. Suck off of it. But it's weird, because then I'm kind of like personifying all these forces, calling them forces. It's anthropocentrism in an inflated manner. But really, when anything, quote-unquote, enters this system through our touching of it, with our sensitivity, when anything comes in like that, it gets intensely personified. It gets animated by the fact that we are animated beings. We're organisms. So anything that we touch, we animate. And it can take on this personified energy by simple intimacy, sensitivity, touch, anything. And then all of a sudden it's like, ooh, we're now alive with all these kind of pathogens from the subtle realm, so to speak. Again, I'm speaking somewhat metaphorically, but not. And our systems aren't clear. They're not luminous. We're weighed down. We're heavy. People talk about, in New Age parlance, they talk about frequency. Our frequency has been dimmed. So when I think about enlightenment, I think about how many parasitic programs do I have running right now that are leeching off my interiority, sucking it. But where's it going? That's where the analogy kind of falls apart. But I have another perspective that I'm going to bring in to save the day. Hyperdimensional beings. I'm not really sold, but I have a very open mind, so I like to just keep it open. Maybe I'll have an experience tomorrow where I'll get to know a hyperdimensional being as they sink their astral, ethereal fangs into me. I mean, after all, if this hyperdimensional being is hyperdimensional, how does it stay hyperdimensional? By feeding on negative, heavy thoughts and feelings and emotions. Wouldn't that just immediately weigh it down? And then all of a sudden, it's in this 3D dimension and it's not hyperdimensional anymore, like this kind of terrifying tesseract. Can you please explain that to me? How does something remain hyperdimensional while it's feeding on 3D negative emotional energy that weighs it down? So, I want to take hyperdimensional into a hyperdimensional context and talk about how vis-a-vis who I was 5 years ago, I'm fairly hyperdimensional. Vis-a-vis who I was 10 years ago, I'm very hyperdimensional. Vis-a-vis who I was 20 years ago, I'm extremely hyperdimensional. Vis-a-vis who I was 30 years ago, I'm extremely hyperdimensional. In other words, I become hyperdimensional relative to a previous dimension of my own being. And this hyperdimensionality isn't simply an expansion of this interiority. It's a realization that this interiority is always already interpenetrating all this exteriority, and they're both expanding simultaneously. And that's why who I am now is hyperdimensional relative to who I was 5 years ago, because this interior-exterior continuum has expanded and enfolded the previous dimensionality. So I'm hyperdimensional relative to myself. And that's where enlightenment becomes even more apparent, if we're going to use that word, enlightenment. Because I am essentially objectifying my interior parasitism. All the programs and viruses, so to speak, that I've got running that keep me weighed down in smaller microcosms of interior-exterior continuum. A smaller microcosm, because these programs are essentially, these viruses, these pathogens, these parasites are essentially contractions. The more contracted we are, the smaller our microcosm, the less dimensional, and then I'd say the less contracted we are, and the fewer the interior parasites and pathogens and programs that suck our happiness into this contracted vortex of the heart, the less we got that going on. Because enlightened awareness is characterized by an overflowing energy that showers out of the heart. Okay? It doesn't mean that everybody's just like crazy and extroverted, talkative people. But people who are awake, they have a luminosity to them. They have an energy to them. They have an overflow to them. They have an abundance to them. They have a luminosity to them. Why? Because the energy isn't being sucked inward into a deficit, into a contraction in the center of the chest, the black hole vortex of the separate self, which is a composite of parasitic programs, parasitic viruses, parasitic pathogens. And what is it? What is this singularity of this darkness inside? Right? Essentially, it's a fear of death, whether it be physical death or psychospiritual death. So what's fascinating is the gravity of that black hole is so intense that if you're lucky, you'll go straight into it and you will die. You will die. But that's what's required to be born again as Godhead. You gotta die into all those parasites that are sucking you into the black hole of the contracted heart, into the vortex of the separate self. And you just keep sucked into that, sucked into that, sucked into that, sucked into that, and you die. And then, if there's a big bang, it's that. And you just keep on big banging. And you explode through those parasites. And in the future, when parasites come your way, and they want to just kind of leech on you, whether it be from a sexual romantic angle, political angle, parental angle, sibling angle, education angle, entertainment angle, whatever it happens to be. Your favorite guru, your favorite spiritual teacher, your favorite metaphysician, anything that's going to keep you locked in like a poultry in a pen, so that one day, boom, you can eat that turkey for Thanksgiving. Your turkey. So enlightenment has many facets and many dimensions. I'm not a real fan of the word. I like to use the word awake. But if we're going to use it, I'm going to say that one of the primary principles of the enlightened self is not to be subject to parasitism. To be free of parasites, inside, outside. Because once you're free of both of those, then you'll realize the continuum of inside-outside. But there's so much parasitism that people don't understand it, right? And it has a very exoteric spin and a very esoteric spin. But there are people who are missing both. The exoteric spin on parasitism is that there's parasites in a master-slave dynamic of the oligarchy that's been perpetuated for thousands of years, the 0.01%. And that's an extremely important exoteric understanding of reality, which is still esoteric to the majority of human beings, unfortunately. Then there's the esoteric, which is the esoteric perspective is what is the parasitism inside of me that keeps sucking the life out of me and makes me a zombie on this planet. Well, it's the incorporation of all these parasitic programs that don't give a fuck about me. But what's beautiful, if you really start to wake up, you can play with all this shit. You turn the tables and you flip the script. All these things that were once sucking your vitality, you flip and you start to have fun. and you start to play, and you start to come alive because you're abundant. You're abundant. Your heart is a cornucopia that's overflowing